Hey guys, welcome to Stephanie Ann again. I am your host, Stephanie Brinkerhoff, and I am here to talk about all things deconstruction, religious trauma, psychedelics, Jungian psychology, inner work, and basically just my process of discovering who I am again after a lifetime in Mormonism. I tend to be a really uncurated person, so most of this podcast will be stream of consciousness style, where I share personal stories and the things that I've learned in hopes of creating connection rather than just sharing information. So thank you so much for being here. Let's go ahead and jump in. All right, I gotta be honest, I'm not quite sure if I know exactly where today's episode is going to go. I have a feeling today's episode is going to get quite personal and maybe a little bit intense, but I really wanted to take an episode to talk about self-hatred and shame. What's interesting about self-hatred is that, like, when I look at myself in my own life, I am not somebody who would have ever thought that I had a lot of shame. The way that my default is mostly just a lot of anxiety. I've had anxiety for my whole life, and it obviously got a lot worse after I got divorced and I left Mormonism and did psychedelics and whatever. It was kind of like my anxiety reached a new level, to the point where I was having panic attacks or, feeling like I was getting ulcers or, just way more intense than my generalized anxiety that I had had for most of my life. But I never thought that I had a lot of shame because, it's I grew up with a very, my parents are very, very kind. My parents are the type of people who are we don't say the word hate, right? We don't say mean things about ourselves. I don't have any memories of my mom or my dad telling me that I was annoying or telling me that I was talking too much, so it's any sort of criticism they had, it was never spoken to, or any annoyances or whatever. And that's a whole other topic of conversation of whether that's healthy or not. But this is a huge part of why my shame was so hard to see, because there was nothing I could really point to in my awareness that was oh, this makes me feel really bad about myself, like memories from childhood. At least, like I said, coming from my parents. And it wasn't until, in 2021, like I said, I left the church, got divorced, and was doing some, experimenting with psychedelics. And sometimes what can happen with psychedelics is that, whatever you're repressing in your body, if you do too much too quickly or the dosing's not right or, a bunch of different things that can happen, what can happen sometimes is that you, everything you're storing in your body, everything that you're repressing, all your trauma and your pain that you've been avoiding or hiding from for your entire life can flood to the surface all at once. It's almost like somebody pops the lid off and everything that you're storing kind of comes flooding out, rushing forward way too quickly. And so this is essentially what happened with me in 2021. And that's when I started having panic attacks. That's when I started having really, really bad nightmares, the type of nightmare where I would wake up in the middle of the night and run to the bathroom because I needed to throw up. And it was interesting because whatever trauma I was holding in my body, whatever repressed emotions or memories or whatever, it was all coming out as immense amounts of terror. And it took me probably a solid, I would say a couple years of doing inner work, going to therapy, trying to kind of bridge the gap between my extremely split off unconscious and my conscious self. It took several years of doing that work to get to the point where I realized that all of my anxiety was protecting me or trying to protect me from immense amounts of shame. And even my health anxiety, body anxiety, I have a lot of that. I'm somebody who has a lot of weird physical symptoms. I mean, I've heard that when it comes to people who have experienced emotional neglect, which is very common in Mormonism, which I've talked about before, when it comes to that, a lot of times what can happen is because you're so split off from your emotions and what's happening in your body, it will just manifest in physical symptoms. And so that's been the case for me, where it's my body's always doing weird things that I'm I don't understand what it's doing. And it's given me a lot of health anxiety. I have a lot of fear around death, which I'm pretty sure has come from my experiences with psychedelics. And even all of that, the more that I've gone into it and explored those like existential fears or like fears for my physical safety, for me, it all comes down to shame underneath it. Not saying this is true for everyone. This has just been how it is for me. In 2021, I've spoken to this a little bit, but I went to some like space holders in the psychedelic world who, didn't necessarily really know what they were doing. And, they were kind of just, they weren't the greatest. And they were like mixing medicines and not creating a super safe container for me and whatnot. And then what ended up happening was afterwards, there were several months. I mean, it was longer than several months, let's be honest. It was like a couple of years where my body, like my nervous system, couldn't reconcile like what it had experienced. And it just thought that I was dying. Like I thought that I was dying, like over and over and over again. But even in all of those memories and those experiences, when I look back on them, the thing that I felt the most underneath the terror was shame. And I felt this immense sense of like guilt and like, if I died, if I accidentally died, I was going to feel so much shame, like I had failed. And so what I have found is that like the fear and the anxiety for me, it's like a defense mechanism trying to keep me out of my shame. And as long as we are keeping ourselves out of something, as long as we are in denial or lying to ourselves about what is really inside of us, we will remain stuck. I remember after I left Mormonism and I was going to a therapist for a little while, and this was maybe like 6 months to a year after I left the church, and I was like deep in the thick of basically just in crisis mode. And in one of our sessions, I was talking about like, it was one of those times where I was like, this is how I feel, but I feel like I should feel like this. And I was conflicted because what I actually felt was like something that I thought was terrible, right? Like maybe it was like a feeling of like extreme bitterness or like victimhood or revenge or, just like things that we're just like, ugh, like people who are like that, like gross. And I was like, that's how I feel. But it's just like, I feel like I should feel obviously not like this. And my therapist was like, oh, but like what feels the most honest? And I was like, oh, well, what's the most honest is that I feel this terrible thing that I'm, the terrible things, that's what's honest. And they were like, okay, like this is the way. That is the way to your liberation. You have to follow what's the most honest in you. And it was the first time in my life that like I had someone who valued honesty over what was like quote unquote right or like what made me a quote unquote good person. And I felt like my whole body relaxed and I was like, oh yeah, like the most honest is just like, I hate the church or I hate this person or I feel just like livid about this and like, or I'm jealous or I'm feeling what, and it was like I could be honest about all of the things that Mormonism had attributed to Satan or to like evil. And then it was like beginning in that process, following what feels the most true in you is where you find your healing. And this is the moment, too, when, like, the whole concept of Satan, it had already dissolved for me by that point. But it was like, oh, if anybody inside of Mormonism or Christianity would just do a little bit of digging beneath their quote unquote evil feelings, they would see that everything that's evil in them has like a wounded inner child underneath it, like all it takes is a therapist who knows how to be like, okay, you come to them and you're just like, I'm feeling like I want revenge. Like I want this person to suffer, and then your therapist can be like, okay, let's follow that. And then if they know how to guide you, soon enough, you find a wounded inner child that is like begging for love and care. And it's like, how, if Christians would do this, they would see that Satan is just like their own wounded inner child. Like it's not that hard. Like you just have to do a little bit more digging. You just have to create a space where those things can be felt without shame or without being told that they're wicked or evil or bad. And then they can start to unwind, and then you can start to see what's underneath them, and then you can start to find the core, and then you learn that like all of that stuff that's like however it's manifesting at first, is just like the defense mechanism. It's like the symptom of a deeper pain. And it's crazy, too, how much the body tries to protect us from these deep core wounds. And it hasn't been until like the last maybe, I would say, year, if that I have really been able to get past my defense mechanisms that have been keeping me out of my shame. Like they were so hell-bent. My anxiety or my, whatever it might be was just so hell-bent on making sure I did not access my own shame that they're just like rigid and like incredibly loud and just really trying to protect me from that. And it took a long time to get to the point where I was like finally reaching, and I didn't know that there was shame under there. It's not like I knew that the whole time. But once I started to really get to the depths of the void inside of me, it was like, oh, there's just a lot of self-hatred in here. And it sounds counterintuitive, but once I started to reach that self-hatred, it actually felt better. It felt better because it felt more true. It felt like the truest part of me. It felt like I was finally feeling or giving voice to like the core of me. And it felt like I was like, oh, this is me. This is me. And it's obviously not all of me, but it's a part of me that is so essential that I've kind of been dancing around or circling around for my entire life that I couldn't even see. And so finally feeling it felt like a relief. And it was like, it's so much easier, for me at least, to feel shame than it is to be swimming in terror. Like having panic attacks. It's just like, oh God, like you can't, I don't know. People are always like, you got to feel it to heal it. You got to feel it to heal it. And like, you got to follow what's in you and whatever, all that stuff. But I'm like, when it comes to anxiety, for me, anxiety is like the one thing that I'm like, I have seen no benefit to it in myself. I got to be honest, you guys. I can feel a benefit when I reach my anger, when I reach my shame, when I feel all of the other emotions inside of me. But anxiety just keeps me stuck. So when I finally started feeling my shame, I was like, yes, this feels like a relief. So what's been interesting as I have accessed my own shame and like my own self-hatred is that often what comes up for me, and if anybody has done EMDR or IFS or any type of parts work, anything like that, basically you're dropping into your body and you'll have like memories come or images come to you or words or whatever, and you kind of just follow what your unconscious is showing you. And I always get images. My psyche, for whatever reason, is very visual. And so I've had many, many occasions where I'm like doing this type of work with a therapist or a practitioner, and I drop into my body and I'm connecting to the pain that's there. And the image that comes to mind is a man stabbing me in the gut, like violently, over and over and over again. Like so much so that like I was asking a friend of mine, I'm like, who's an intuitive, I'm like, do you think I was like murdered in a past life? Like what? Why is this violent image always coming to me? And when I feel it in my body, it feels so resonant. Like I'm like, that feels true. Like I feel this hatred towards me, this violence towards me coming from men that's showing up in this image of me being stabbed. And then every time I sit with it, the thing that I feel is I deserve this. I'm like, yes, this makes sense. This is the truth, guys. This is what comes up in me in therapy. This is just what's there. All the feminists throughout history are rolling in their graves right now. But that's what's there. That's what's the most honest. And I spent a lot of time thinking about this because I'm like, I grew up with really, I would say for Mormonism, like really healthy men in my life. My dad and my brothers, they're all more on the sensitive side. They don't have like weird anger, aggression issues. Like they're not, like I had just as many personal one-on-one deep conversations with my dad as I did with my mom. And I've had similar conversations with both of my brothers throughout my life. And my childhood was mostly just really sheltered. and protected and, filled with a lot of good memories. And so I'm like, what? Why do I feel this? Such a violent image in my body. And then the more therapy I did, I was like, oh, it's the patriarchy. This is my experience in Mormonism. This is my body showing me how it has internalized the patriarchy. And, we always think about violence towards women as like outright violence towards women, right? Like physical or sexual or whatever. And that's obviously there. But violence towards women from the patriarchy is so much more than the outward expressions of it that we can see. There's so much more going on. And it's not to say that those are obviously a huge deal like that. Actual physical or sexual violence towards women is a huge issue in our world. And on top of that, there's a whole other level of violence towards women that comes from patriarchy that is hidden, that's energetic, that's a learned way of being that men and women both embody that they can't see. It's like consciously on the surface, just like in my experience specifically, we love each other as men and women, right? We love each other. We take care of each other. We are kind to each other. But under a patriarchal system like Mormonism, energetically, what's happening is basically women filleting themselves. This is another image that comes to me often. It's like me just filleting myself onto a table and letting men take what they need. And then the men don't know how to feel empowered without being constantly nursed by the woman. And the woman believes that it is her job to fillet herself out and to constantly feed the men. And it's like an unconscious learned pattern that even when on the surface, no one's being sinister, no one's being abusive, underneath, this is the thought system behind patriarchy. So then as my body is showing me these incredibly violent images of how my system is holding the patriarchy, it's taken me back to all of the messaging and everything that I've learned in childhood about what it means to be a woman. And I've had to do a lot of like deep self-reflecting because like I said, I don't have any memories on the surface of like, my dad or my brothers or men just being like treating women like shit. I don't have that. It's like everyone's just like, in Mormonism, they do this thing where they're like the women kind of get put on a pedestal in a weird way to try to make them feel like they're not actually being oppressed. But then the men don't know that that's what's happening either. Like they legitimately are just like, yeah, women, like the women are the church. We couldn't survive without our wonderful women, and then the women are like, yeah, we are so special. And then no one can see that underneath the system is violent towards women because it thrives on their self-sacrificing and their disempowerment and their, like I said, filleting themselves out on the table for the men. And so as I've dived into the way that my own body has internalized this, when I was in elementary school, like before I went through puberty, I was kind of just like a ragamuffin kid, I didn't give two fucks about anything. I remember there was all these girls who were like boy crazy and they like, had crushes on so-and-so and they were like doing their nails and doing their hair and like buying cute clothes. And I was like, the fuck? Like I'm like, you want that crusty kid over there to like you? Like what? And my mom would try to get me to like wear cute clothes and I'd be like, it's not comfortable, like I don't want to wear that. And I would like do my hair the same way every day. And I was the one who was just like, okay, I'm going to plan this game. We're going to like organize these night games. We're going to meet here at this time. I'm going to make this map. I'm going to hide it here. Then you're going to pretend this and then blah, 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 blah. I was the one who was like organizing like skits and organizing different like weird parties for my friends or making up different games or like making really detailed and in-depth crafts and like art pieces. And I remember when I was in the 6th grade, how they, well, at least at my elementary school, they would like hand out awards. Like they would give each kid an award. I don't know if they still do this, but I got the Princess Diana Award, which basically means that like I have a really big heart and I make everyone feel loved. And I was so mad because I wanted cutest clothes or something or cutest hair or best hair. It was probably best hair knowing me. And I didn't get it. And I was like, Princess Diana, like, lame. And then at that point, too, I was running for like student body office, like going into 7th grade. I ran to be a part of like the student body office in 7th grade. And I ended up winning. And I became like the 7th grade student body president. I don't think I really knew what I was getting myself into, but I really liked it. I liked being involved, and I was just like nerd through and through, I've always just been a nerd to my core, honestly. And so then like 7th grade goes by and we're going into 8th grade, and I'm like, oh, I'm going to run for office again. And so in order to run for office in going into 8th grade, we had to plan like a skit. We had to do this skit that we had to perform during an assembly. I can't believe I'm sharing this story. And I was like, I have the best idea. I was like, I'm going to dress up as a doctor. And I did. I dressed up as a doctor. I went out on the stage and I was like, hi, I'm Dr. Vote. And if you just imagine a bunch of junior high kids, like I remember there were some older boys like sitting on the front row and they all laughed at me, and then this girl came out after me and she was like really, really cute. She had like really long hair. She had this really cute outfit on. And she was kind of like playing into her cuteness and like her sweetness and her appeal in that way as a way to like get people to vote for her. And I remember she was like waving her hair around and I'm still bitter about it. Can you guys tell? Needless to say, I did not win and she ended up winning. And I remember thinking like, oh, like that was the moment that I realized that it clicked for me that I was not cool and that like I wasn't wanted. The boys didn't want me. I realized at that point, I'm like, oh, that's what boys want. They want whatever the hell that girl's doing. And that's the moment that like my inner child, like my true core self started to become lost. And all of the messaging that I had inherited from childhood about what it means to be a woman and how I came from Adam's rib. I'm basically just an entity, really. I'm just an accessory. So the reason that I was created was to make the man feel good. I'm here to be a support to the man. I'm here. And it wasn't like I heard this messaging and it made me feel bad about myself. Obviously, it did unconsciously, but on the surface, the internalized misogyny is so deep that it's like you yourself as a woman, you feel special and chosen if you can make a man feel special and chosen. It's like if I can make a man feel good about himself, then I feel good about myself. That means that I'm doing a good job. That means that I'm being Christ-like. That means that I'm being what a woman is supposed to be. So all of that messaging started to come online, when I was going through puberty and I actually started to like boys. And it's like I liked them and I wanted them to like me back. And so everything came online of what I had learned about like the reason that you're here is to get married. And you can't go to heaven unless you're married to a man. And you look to your husband as your husband looks to the Lord, right? And what does a man want? What is the woman for? She's a helpmeet. What does that even fucking mean? I remember hearing that so many times growing up. She's a helpmeet for her husband. She's a joy to be around. She's calm. She creates peace in the home. She's kind. She basically is just somebody who makes the man's life better because she offers him so much. She offers him a constant support of whatever he's pursuing or doing in his life. She offers him comfort and just like unconditional love. And she doesn't rock the boat. She's basically there to make his life better. And in exchange, the exchange is that you are then chosen. That's the exchange. That's how much my misogyny was internalized to the point where it was like, what made me feel like I had worth was that simply that a man would choose me. That's it. It wasn't like, oh yeah, like I'm going to do all these things for a man. And then in return, he's going to do all these things for me. Like it wasn't even just your classic codependent role playing situation. It was like, I'm going to do all these things for the man. And then in return, I will be chosen. And if I'm chosen, then I matter and I'm special. And I get to go to heaven because the man chose to marry me. And so my child self began to become lost at that point. And I then just practiced becoming everything I could that a man would want. And if a man didn't want me, for whatever reason, it was my fault. It was because I didn't do a good enough job. If a man didn't want me, it was because I just wasn't, I wasn't pretty enough. I wasn't kind enough. I didn't make him feel good enough about himself. I didn't offer him enough. I didn't bring him enough joy. I wasn't sexy enough. I wasn't like attractive enough or interesting enough. Or it's because I was too much. I showed too much of myself. I was too emotional. I was too attached. I was too irrational or dramatic or whatever. I showed them too much of myself. If they didn't want me, then it was like a reflection of me, a reflection of all the ways that I wasn't doing a good enough job being a woman. Because the number one thing that makes you exist as a woman in a patriarchal system is being chosen, which thus then leads you to filleting yourself out on a table so that men can decide if they want you. They can decide, is this good enough? And then you just lay there and hope to be picked. Once again, the feminists out there are probably vomiting in their mouths. But this is what's there. What's interesting too is that like getting divorced, it's not like this conditioning went away. I went through an entire 11-year marriage. I had someone who did choose me. I accomplished the thing. I did it. I did what I was supposed to do. I went through an entire 11-year marriage, and then when I got divorced, all of this conditioning was still there. And even if consciously, on the surface, I'm like, I want something different. I don't want to be in this weird codependent thing with men. That's, like I want to address my own internalized misogyny. I want to feel like a whole human being. Energetically, under the surface, the learned pattern of behavior has just continued to repeat for me. And I don't think it will forever. I think that this is the work I'm in now. Really what this comes down to at the core, for me, has been addressing and holding my own shame and self-hatred. Because, to be honest, it would be so much easier to just be like, I hate, like, fuck men. I hate you guys. Y'all are fucking pieces of shit. That would be way easier. And it's not like those parts of me exist. I'm not saying that it's valid to have a lot of anger when you've experienced violence towards women for your entire life. Like that is valid. There's nothing wrong with that. But for me, that hasn't been the end of the story. And going back to what I was saying earlier, where it's like, I have to follow what feels most true in me. It's like the anger and the hatred towards men. It's not that doesn't feel true, but it doesn't feel like the truest thing. It feels just like my anxiety in the sense that it's a defense mechanism to keep me out, trying to keep me out of the truest truth of what I'm feeling, which is self-hatred. And for me, it's like I can't hate men without simultaneously hating myself. And that's not like a weird enmeshed thing. That's not a thing where I'm like, I need men to feel happy and I need to love them because I'm directly attached to, like, my sense of identity is, connected to that. It has nothing to do with that. And everything to do with the fact that, like, what you see externally is a reflection of what's happening internally. And that's just been true for me. That's not even like just a random spiritual philosophy. That's been my truth, is that the more inner work I do, the more time I spend getting to know myself, the hatred of men is self-hatred. You can see how it's internalized in my own body. I have an image of a man stabbing me in the gut. And then I'm laying there and I'm saying, I deserve this. That is self-hatred. That may be a self-hatred that I learned from patriarchy, that I learned from, my experiences with oppression as a woman, but it is being internalized as self-hatred, even if it came from men or patriarchy originally. And recognizing that self-hatred is actually what's there gives me, it puts the power back in my hands. It allows me to say, okay, this is my responsibility to hold. This is my responsibility to address. It is my responsibility to make space for my shame and my self-hatred instead of trying to hold myself out of it by just saying that I hate men. And this isn't to be, I think it can be complicated to say this, especially for people who are used to feeling like caretakers, right? Who haven't worked through their own codependency, because then you're just you'll take everything on as your own problem and your own responsibility when, things that are actually not your responsibility. So this isn't to say that I'm over here being I gotta take responsibility for my own self-hatred so that my relationships can be better. Yes, I am saying that for myself, but everyone should be doing this work. Men need to be doing this work. Men need to address whatever weird shit happened with their mom in their life. Address how you hate your mom. Address how the women in your life failed you. Whatever it is that happened with your mother. Address it so that you don't bring that unconscious self-hatred into your relationships and have it manifest as this unconscious hatred towards women. One thing I think about often, too, is how I have a son. And what's so interesting is, sometimes I'll watch movies with my kids from, the 90s. And the messaging around women it's very reflective of, the 90s and the early 2000s. And it's everywhere. It's women with tiny waists and giant boobs and, men just, slapping their asses and, these comments about their bodies and what women are for and, just very, degrading of women. It's just everywhere in the media in the 90s and the 2000s, even in movies that are supposedly okay for kids. And then now, it's the opposite. There's so much messaging in current media, whether it be movies or shows or movies or shows or music, about how, women are these goddesses and men are kind of just dopey idiots. And women don't need men because men don't have anything to offer. And women don't need men because men are whatever. And there's been more than one time where I've sat there and I thought, what messaging is my 7-year-old son internalizing from hearing this? Because I sure as hell don't want him to grow up feeling how I felt. And of course it's not the same across the board, right? You can't compare, systemically it's different, the hatred of women versus the hatred of men. But on an interpersonal relationship, in my interpersonal relationships, it matters to me that no one is dehumanized. I don't want my son to have to now learn what it is that women want, that he can offer them, and then have to cater to that so that he can be chosen by one. I don't want him to feel like he has to perform because men are nothing unless they're offering something to a woman. That's exactly how I felt. I don't want women to be centered just as much as I don't want men to be centered. And this is the part where I get canceled. I feel like in reality, even though I identify as a cis straight woman, I have never super identified with my gender. That's just the truth. I'm I care more about humanizing people and relating human to human than I do about what your genitalia says about your role or how I should treat you or what I should think about you. All the systemic oppression, the violence towards women, all of that aside that I have obviously experienced and I'm holding in my own body, I care the most about connection in my interpersonal relationships. And I have to address my own self-hatred and how I'm holding that in my body. The self-hatred that I inherited from being a woman, I have to take responsibility for that so that I'm not perpetuating any form of this pattern. I don't want this pattern, but on the opposite side. I don't want to teach my son that if he wants a woman to choose him, that he has to make a lot of money and that she can do no wrong because she's a woman. I don't fucking want that. As a woman myself, I would never want a man who tells me I can do no wrong. That is the type of thinking that's gotten us into this mess. People thinking that they can do no wrong, that they are somehow above other people. I don't want a man to tell me that. That's terrifying. That's like, I'm much more interested in self-reflection, in individuating and becoming whole. I would much rather have that than just repeat the same system of thought that patriarchy gave me, but on the opposite side, even if it feels like a sense of relief temporarily. I would rather do the painful work of self-reflecting because it will foster deeper intimacy. And so for my own kids, like for my son, it's like, how can I teach him to not perpetuate the patterns of the patriarchy? How can I teach him to not blame what he feels on women? How can I teach him to name his emotions, to work with his own anger and his aggression, to be in touch with what he's actually feeling, and to see women as whole human beings who he's curious about, just like he's curious about anyone else? And then how can I teach my daughters to not repeat the patterns of patriarchy on the opposite side? How can I teach her to feel empowered without pressing her foot into a man's face? How can I teach her to feel empowered because she loves herself, and to recognize if misogyny ever shows up in a partner that she chooses to be with? And my best bet for getting there, for being able to see these patterns clearly and teach them clearly to my children, is to fully and completely recognize them and see them in myself. Leaving the patriarchal system is not enough. That is not enough work alone to deconstruct a lifetime of your entire world, even outside of religion, pounding these patriarchal beliefs into your brain. And saying all of this, does not mean that you should bypass your hatred of men or whatever mother issues you have with your mom for men who are, it's not like you need to bypass all of that in the weird sort of like Christian, spiritual, religious way that's like, I'm a good person, so I'm not going to hate, I'm not going to feel anger. It's about being honest with yourself. It's about not lying to yourself. We can't hate each other without simultaneously hating ourselves. It just goes back to what I was saying earlier about how underneath all of the quote-unquote evil that's valid that I feel inside of me, there is a part of me that wants to be loved. And it's a lot more difficult to find that part because that, once you access your own shame and your own self-hatred, not in a way where you're blended with it or drowning in it, but in a way that you can tend to it, that is when your heart starts to soften and open. And that's fucking painful. Not only is it painful, it's terrifying. It's exposing. It makes you feel raw. It makes you feel undefended. It feels like a type of like strength and power that comes from wholeness. And it can feel really, really scary at first to start making contact with and working with those parts of yourself. And working with my own shame, to me, has been like some of the most profound and like the work that I've done that has given me the most clarity. Relationships can be so confusing for me sometimes, especially because like I grew up in such a codependent environment. Can be like what actually is mine here? Like when we say like find someone who meets your needs, like what does that mean? Like what are we saying? How do I know what's mine versus what's theirs? And it's like you can be on both sides of the coin, right? Like I've been on the side where it's like, okay, let me fillet myself out on this table so that you can feel like I'm meeting your needs. And then I've been on the other side where I want the man to tend to me and care for me and treat me in such a way that it just magically happens to make me feel complete and whole and heal my inner child. So it's been confusing for me to be like, what is actually mine? Like I can't quite tell. And all roots of codependency come from shame. They come from self-hatred. It's like when you become more clear in your own sense of self-love and, self-respect and whatnot, it becomes a lot harder to be on either side of the codependent pattern because it just becomes more clear where your self-hatred is manifesting. or where the other person's self-hatred is manifesting. And of course, we need each other, right? Like, there's a lot of healing that does happen relationally, but we have to know, like, the material that we're working with unconsciously and what we're bringing to the situation, and take responsibility for our own healing and our own process. And when you really get down to it, like when you really get down to the core of like holding space for yourself, it is beautiful. It's painful, and it feels like it's difficult. You know, nobody wants to sit and think about how they feel like a gross, you know, unwanted, shame-ridden human being. No one wants to sit with that. But as you do it, as you hold space for those parts of yourself, it does feel like love. It does create space for you to really love yourself. And it does feel better. At least in my experience, it feels better than trying to hold myself out of it. I mean, essentially all you're doing is finding all of the parts of you that were lost, all of the parts of you that at one point or another learned, I am not cool, I am not desired, I am not wanted, I am not enough. You're holding space for those parts of yourself. And I honestly have this theory, I could be wrong about this. I think, you know, if you grew up, if you were once a child, you have shame. And it's obviously to different degrees in different people. And so you don't need to feel ashamed for hating yourself. It's like the most common thing in the world. Just let yourself hate yourself. Let go of your shame about hating yourself. And then through your self-hatred, you can find your self-love. At least that's how it's been for me. I feel like I just said the word self-hate and self-hatred like 1,200 times. So I apologize if that was redundant or annoying. Sometimes when I get really in my own thoughts, I kind of repeat myself over and over and over again. So hopefully it didn't feel like that. Okay, thank you guys so much for listening. Once again, if you want to hear me talk about something specific, feel free to let me know. And you can find more of my content on Instagram or TikTok under Stephanie Ann again. Okay, thank you.